Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Emma Thaman, and today I will be, is this working? Today I will be presenting my honors thesis, #cottagecore, the hidden ideology of internet visual culture. So as a young person who has spent a large portion of my life on the internet, and also as a double major in art and psychology, the idea of visual rhetoric on the internet has always been an interesting topic to me. Specifically, I became interested in the phenomenon of the internet aesthetic, which I will define as a grouping of online content in which visual and cultural ideas are identified and categorized, often blending fashion, art, sometimes music, and visual motifs from across history and stories. Sorry. So these images here are just a few examples of what one might come across searching for internet aesthetics online, specifically image-based platforms like Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest, etc. Each of these images represents a mood board of a specific aesthetic. So as you can see, each follows a specific set of rules or visual themes. They share similar colors. Here I reiterate my definition here, and the important thing is that the internet aesthetic is not an isolated phenomenon. It represents the way that internet culture broadly functions among young people and illustrates the sort of decentralized communal nature of internet communication and information sharing. So internet cultures form through a mix of algorithmic influences and established community formation principles. There honestly isn't much we know about this, but what we do know is that internet cultures form into these sort of microcultures or miniature representations of external cultures resembling subcultures, and these exist within the broader framework of the internet at large. So I'm looking at the idea of internet aesthetics in the context of identity development among adolescents. So American psychoanalyst Erik Erikson is a foundational figure in developmental psychology, specifically psychosocial psychology, and he suggested that during the time of adolescence, the primary conflict faced by this age group is that of identity versus role confusion. So the main idea here is that adolescents are seeking to explore and develop an identity in the midst of confusion and not knowing who they are yet. In the contemporary setting, we don't really know exactly how the internet might factor into this, but it must. The way that social interactions occur online is fundamentally different from the way they occur in real life spaces. Adolescents have an access to so much information, so many people, so many representations of identities and interests, and the anonymous nature of the internet means that they can engage with anything they want without fear of judgment from external sources like peers or family. So under Erikson's model, the internet aesthetic could become one of a variety of mediators in identity development. So an adolescent might find a sense of identity and stability in engaging with or identifying with an internet aesthetic, which could mimic the way that adolescents engage with subcultures and fandoms on the internet and outside of it. Part of the reason internet content is so different is because of the role of algorithms, which require that content be labeled and defined very clearly and specifically. So language has been developed to categorize very broad ideas into very narrow topics that can be searched and explored, and someone can find nearly infinite content on something by searching very few words. So important here is the concept of algorithmic determinism, which means that everything online passes through an array of filters. Most people aren't really thinking about these filters when they're engaging with internet content. We may know about a lot of them. For example, most people know that if you search up content on YouTube, for example, you're going to get recommended content that is similar based on your watch history. So that's something that people understand, but there's still so much that we're not thinking about. So this makes echo chambers something that form easily on the internet. And an echo chamber is defined as an online space in which only specific voices or opinions are accepted and others are omitted through a range of factors. They could be explicitly shunned by members of the echo chamber or algorithmically sorted out, meaning no one even sees them. The intersection of these two ideas means that ideological pipelines can form on the internet. So engaging with online content can lead to the recommendation of similar content. And sometimes it's just what the algorithm thinks is similar, and it doesn't actually mean the same thing. Maybe it's something that you didn't search up for specifically. And I will get more into what that looks like with my example of cottagecore. So cottagecore, I picked this as an example of an internet aesthetic because it is hugely popular. It gained popularity around the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is characterized by a romanticization of nature and rural living, and the incorporation of fairy tale and fantasy motifs, historical aspects. Basically imagine you're living in a cottage in the woods, and you grow your own food, and you wear pretty linen dresses all day, and you're immersed in nature, and it's all feminine and perfect. That's the main idea here. Here I reiterate some of the important visual themes found in cottagecore, sort of farm and homestead imagery, rustic imagery, a lot of historical imagery. So the cottagecore is not really a new idea. It is as an internet aesthetic, but it draws on a long history of trying to connect to nature, or this idea of going back to nature, going back to some form of an idealized past. We saw this in French aristocracy, where French noblewomen would basically play act rural, rustic lives and pretend to be milkmaids and these idealized feminine servant peasants. And they obviously didn't live these lives outside of this, and it became this strange romanticization of an other and a past that does not exist in the current moment. And these historical roots do influence the ideologies behind the aesthetic, even if the aesthetic is not on its own ideological, even if it is in some ways very neutral and fun. For example, a lot of cottagecore content only shows exclusively white, thin women in traditional European wear. It is not a typically multicultural phenomenon. A lot of enjoyers of cottagecore are feminist or anti-racist. There is a very leftist camp that emerges from this, but that's only some people. And a lot of other people are more likely to be enchanted by these same ideas that exist within the historical backing of the aesthetic. So why is this so appealing? A large element to this here is the disconnection from nature that we face in contemporary US society and in other contemporary societies. American life is shaped in many ways by neoliberal capitalism, which emphasizes hyper-individualism, achieving things on your own, technological advancement, economic power. And as a result, we are overwhelmed constantly by information and imagery and outside pressures. Also important here, because cottagecore is such a feminine or feminized aesthetic, is the concept of neoliberal feminism, which is a distinct form of feminism. I'm not talking about all feminism here, but a specific camp of feminism that is intended to suit the purposes of neoliberal capitalism. This is sometimes called girl boss feminism because it pushes the idea that women must work hard, climb the corporate ladder, and shun feminine aspects of themselves in order to secure worth and respect from an external society. So these things are very alienating to a lot of people from across backgrounds, from across political and religious identities. And the popularity of cottagecore speaks to a deeply rooted societal need to reconnect to our communities, to slow down, and to connect with the natural world. Ultimately, wishing to return to the past can have some issues. It can make one more likely to excuse and romanticize outdated and potentially very regressive ideas. Some public figures and influencers know this, and so they use cottagecore or similar aesthetics to make their value system appealing to a young audience. And a good example of this is the trad wife community, which stands for a traditional wife. It's a community that repackages these very old ideas of feminine submission and Christian alt-right nationalism. So when they wrap this ideology up in this beautiful aesthetic that many people feel very connected to, it makes the lifestyle feel very appealing. All right. Now, this is not the only expression of cottagecore online. We also see, because cottagecore is such a decentralized phenomenon, that there is a community of people that form a more resistant pipeline, one that is more explicitly leftist and becomes very feminist. And this can be due to the fact that the escapist nature of cottagecore makes it attractive to anyone that does not feel at home in modern society. For these people, specifically queer and non-white women or people, we see this representation of radical and anarchical freedom from repressive society, this fantasy to return to nature and live by one's own rules, but not return to past ideals like the trad wife camp does. And so the femininity of cottagecore can become a very radical tool for some people, because when communities previously excluded from these ideas of femininity embrace it and engage with the aesthetic, they are essentially stating that femininity is something for them to express, for them to define, and that they should be respected regardless of whether or not they choose to embrace that aesthetic. And a key here is that both of these camps kind of reject this idea of neoliberal feminism and also the idea of current neoliberal system where we have to move so fast and work so hard. And so despite the very different natures of these camps, we see a similar urge to escape and to forge one's own path in this society. So ultimately, there is a need to look further at what this means. What something like an internet aesthetic, which seems so harmless, can say about the identity formation of young people and their engagement with political and social ideologies. More research should be done on other internet aesthetics and other expressions of internet cultures. And ultimately, nothing we consume online is neutral. Everything has an ideology to it somewhere, even if it's hidden. And so it's important to know what you're looking at. And remember, I forgot what I was going to say. Yes, I'm done. Sorry. Thank you so much. Yes.
So in your research, you mentioned that sort of the two camps of this cottagecore, which would lead to, very feminine trad wife scenario versus the other camp, which may be more non-traditional, queer, non-white. Did you see in your research, are there any developing, is there a sub-aesthetic developing to appeal more to the queer, non-white, leftist side, or is it still just very traditional and hyper-feminine and restricted to white, beautiful ladies?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't have time to get into that. with this research, but there is absolutely a difference in how these aesthetics look. And sub-aesthetics have kind of formed as the need to continually define subcategories of these aesthetics goes on. So one example that came up a lot is something like goblin core, which is similar to cottagecore. It's called goblin core because it's like the gross and ugly version of cottagecore. It's more about embracing nature, being dirty in nature, and living a kind of this very independent and anarchical woodland life. And it strays away from this idealization of real history that cottagecore has.
So that would be the homestead where they show the dirt and the mud and the chicken.
It's hard to explain without pictures, but there is a difference in how it looks, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Do you think that as the internet has a bigger and bigger role, the escapism or like going back to nature will increase more, we will reaching more neutral ground, where there would be such a harsh resistance to like the cottagecore and goblin core, which makes like a very like corporal feminism. Do you ever think we're gonna get to a more neutral area?
It's really hard to say because the way that people engage with and experience cottagecore and other internet aesthetics is so varied, so decentralized, that beginning to parse what it really means for broader society is very difficult, which is why for my research I had to end up really just posing more questions than I could answer in this scope. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Okay, well, thank you, Emma. I'd like to invite Dr. Martin up to say just a few words about the work of Emma and adorn her with the stolen cord, which I'll pass to you.
I'm so glad to have had the chance to work with Emma. I think I learned a lot about the whole internet aesthetic. I know that many people already knew about that, but I thought it was fascinating, and I think the implications for identity are so important. And she was a delight to work with.